Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Cord Ebeling here, Carter's Home Downsizing. I am celebrating this month 15 years of helping mostly seniors and the children of seniors with too much stuff. And during this time, I've also been a BCAR affiliate member. So my services range from one-on-one sorting through full-scale house cleanouts. We also work with your sellers, helping them to determine what to keep, donate, discard, recycle, and sell. Through our large network of referral partners, which includes antique dealers, auction houses, estate sale people, and ourselves, we get items of value sold for them. We can pack and haul numerous donations, including the obvious clothing, kitchenware, knickknacks, and home decor to a number of local charities. On the disposal end, we either haul in our cargo vans and trailer a lot of undonatable debris, or we can simply get a dumpster in our client's driveway, and with my team, we'll load it right there. We're big believers, however, in keeping things out of landfills, and on the recycling end, we remove and properly dispose of a lot of e-waste, which includes the obvious computers, laptops, printers, old TVs, old stereos, and things like that. We can also handle problematic items like old fluids and even the dead lawnmower you may have in the shed or the garage. We even work with an accredited shredder locally for anyone that has years and years of confidential documents that could be things with your social on them or business records, old tax records, things like that. So how this process usually begins as you as the agent are giving my client either my business card or flyer or my phone number, and they're calling me. We're learning a little bit more about the potential project, the timeline, who's involved, where is it. I'm mostly working with folks in Bucks and Montgomery counties. And what would happen next is if there's a good fit, we'll schedule a complimentary consultation, and I'll meet them at their home, take a tour, attic to basement, closets, kitchen, crawl space, shed, barn, behind the barn, whatever it may be, for me to get a better idea of what's there, how much is there, and the volume of items that needs to be handled. So my ultimate goal is to make your job as agents easier, less stressful, and to move things along by me helping these folks with decluttering their homes, making the homes for you look bigger, brighter, cleaner, and more marketable. And for more information, please take a look at my website, cartershd.com. That's CARTERS, H as in Harry, D as in David.com. And you can always reach me on my business line at 215-794-8585. If anyone ever has any question, there's no question too silly, give me a call. I appreciate everyone's time today, and happy downsizing, and have a great day. And that's all I have, Lisa.
Thank you, Court. Thanks. And now Darlene is ready to go on. Thanks.
Yeah, so welcome everyone. It's 2024 and we've had more weather than what we've had in a while with all of the snow that's going on and now the rain and floods and all of that. But we want to welcome everyone to the Power Hour. Is everybody awake and ready for this information? Today we're going to unearth Pennsylvania's real estate secrets and journey through the fascinating landscape of Pennsylvania's real estate with a focus on recorded restrictions. So Pennsylvania's real estate landscape is full of recorded restrictions. While some serve a purpose, others are problematic. Gain insight into which are legal and which are not. I think that's very important. So prepare for an engaging and enlightening session led by real estate attorney Marshal Granor, right? I hope I said that correct.
Yeah, close enough.
Garner?
Granor.
Granor.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me put an I in there. So Marshall is a real estate attorney in Horsham who helps clients in their residential and commercial real estate sales and leasing transactions, large and small. He was a principal author of Pennsylvania's Uniform Plan Community Act and spends much of his work assisting community associations. Mr. Granor is a past chair of the Pennsylvania Bar Association's section on real property, probate, and trust law, and volunteers with the Community Associations Institute's Pennsylvania Legal Action Committee. Marshall is a fellow in the National College of Community Association Lawyers. He is also licensed as a real estate broker and title insurance agent in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey, as well as being a licensed Pennsylvania real estate instructor. He frequently teaches continuing education courses for attorneys, real estate licensees, and title insurance agents, as well as for community association professionals and residents. Marshall is president of the Gaynor and Company, realtors with offices in Horsham and Yardley. He was a partner in Gaynor Price Homes, a residential and commercial builder developer for 40 years. So he has lots of knowledge and experience. A member of the Pennsylvania Bar Association's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team, Marshall is currently leading an effort to enact legislation in Pennsylvania to address racial and religious restrictions in the deeds. And without further ado, I introduce Marshal Granor, Esquire.
Greetings, everybody. So I'm used to seeing all of you when we're doing 3.5-hour classes on agreements of sale and condominiums and leasing. And I do hope that if you have additional continuing ed that you need, that you'll be signing up for some of those in the near future. Today, we're going to talk about illegal deed covenants. And let me just read one to you as I share my screen and get to our PowerPoint. So, hello, here we go. Dun, dun, dun. So we're going to talk about racial and religious covenants and a brand new law that literally was signed into law within the last month, and that's Act 54 of 2023. And what are we dealing with? Let me read you a restrictive covenant that is on 54 properties in the Germantown section of Philadelphia. If you were to sell any one of these homes and to pull up a title search, this is what you would hear. At no time herever forever shall any of these said properties be owned, occupied, or leased by any persons other than those of the Caucasian race. That at any time hereafter forever, if any person or persons of any other race occupy any of the said properties or any portion thereof, it shall be permissible for any owner or occupier of these properties to evict the same by force of arms or by any action at law, and any title given by any deed to any person other than of the Caucasian race shall be null and void. Now, how would you feel if you were a non-Caucasian person and you found that this was on your deed, not from 1820 or 1915, but in 2024? These kinds of deed records exist throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and throughout the US. We're going to talk about how they got there, what the courts did to allow them, what the courts did to get rid of them, what our Association of Realtors did to enable them, and now this new law that I've been involved in for the last 3.5 years, which is the law of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I need to look at all of you for a couple minutes, and I'm going to ask you to please indulge me, and if you can, turn on your cameras, because I want to try something with all of you, please. And then you can go back to whatever you're doing. So what I'd like you to do, this deed restriction I just mentioned uses the term Caucasian. So when many of us fill out forms, it asks, are you Black? Are you Native American? Are you Hispanic, Caucasian, or something else? So I'm going to ask you, if you say, yes, I am Caucasian, when you fill out these forms, to put your hand up. I do. Okay, there's no test. So keep your hand up, please. Now, who put the, I didn't do that. Okay, so now, if you have any, let's say, Polish ancestry, you can put your hand down. Or if your ancestry is Russian, Hungarian, Jewish, Italian, Irish, Asian, African. I don't see, there's a couple of hands. Okay, we're done. All of the things that I just mentioned are people who at one time or another were considered not Caucasian. So my question is, for those of you who put your hand up like I do, because I fill out Caucasian and then I go, wait a minute, my family's from Russia, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. That's not Caucasian, folks. Why do you answer Caucasian? I don't know. But anyway, thank you for indulging me in that. It was kind of fun, just for me to understand. Okay, so where do we begin? We begin with a little history. We're going to be talking about ordinances and deed restrictions, restrictive covenants. What's an ordinance? Well, first of all, what's a deed restriction? Deed restriction, we talk about it as a deed restriction. It's a restrictive covenant against real property. It's a private limitation that anybody can put on their property. You have them on yours. I guarantee you have restrictions. Why? Because you might have an easement that says that you're going to allow Comcast to put cable on your property, or for water, sewer, electricity. Those are restrictive covenants. Those are restrictions. It's not necessarily written right into the deed, although many of these are. That shows up in your chain of title. It runs forever with the land. It's there. Once it's put there, you can't get rid of it. You might be able to nullify it in some way, but it's always in the chain of title. It'll show up on a title report. What's an ordinance? We have laws, statutes that are passed by the federal government. We have statutes that are passed by state governments. When a local municipality passes a law, we call those ordinances. So we're going to talk about a couple of Supreme Court cases that deal with deed restrictions, like this one from the Germantown section of Philadelphia, and see what the courts did with it. We're going to be talking mostly about the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution. And I've reprinted it here for you. All persons born or naturalized in the US are citizens and of the United States and the state where they reside. You can't abridge people's privileges or immunities as citizens of the US. You can't deprive people of life, liberty, or property without due process. And then the thing we're most going to focus on today, you can't deny any person within the jurisdiction of the United States the equal protection of the laws, the Equal Protection Clause. 14th Amendment came right after the Civil War. It's been the law of our country for a very long time. So in 1917, as World War I was still raging, but hopefully coming soon to an end, the US Supreme Court got the case of Buchanan versus Worley, City of Louisville. What you're seeing on the screen is the name of this ordinance when it was adopted. An ordinance to prevent conflict and ill feeling between the white and colored races in the city of Louisville, and to preserve the public peace and promote the general welfare by making reasonable provisions requiring, as far as practicable, the use of separate blocks for residences, places of abode, and places of assembly by white and colored people, respectively. Now I need to stop for a second. I'm not trying to offend anybody in the language that I'll be using today. I'm using the language that was in these laws, ordinances, and court decisions, and rules and regulations of the National Association of Realtors. If you're offended, I'm sorry, it's not meant to. We're using the real language. So here is the name of this ordinance from Louisville, Kentucky, that was passed in the early 1900s. The Supreme Court, oh, and by the way, the first section of the ordinance goes on to say, and this is not on the screen, it's unlawful for any colored person to move into and occupy as a residence, place of abode, or to establish a place of public assembly, any house upon a block upon which a greater number of houses are occupied as residences, places of abode, and whatever, by white people than are occupied for the same by colored people. So what it's basically saying is we're going to look at a city block And if more people there are, their word, colored than white, then we're going to let more colored people live there. If more people that are white that live there, then all new sales and rentals will have to be to white people only. We're going to separate out folks. And why are we doing this? What did it say? To prevent conflict and ill feelings between the races. Isn't that a good reason to do something like this? We don't want people to feel badly, so we'll just divide everybody by race. So the Supreme Court said, wait a minute. Remember that 14th Amendment? The state, the federal government and the state governments cannot discriminate. This is a government agency passed an ordinance, a law, that says we're going to separate the races. It's been the law since 1866 that you can't do that. So the court just threw away this restrictive covenant and said, can't do it. And if that had been the end of things, then over 100 years ago, all of these restrictive covenants that were meant to divide people would be gone. But guess what? They're not gone. We're still stuck with them. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a proud realtor. I have been since I got my license in 1970 something. The National Association of Real Estate Brokers was the organization prior to NAR. Please look at Article 34 with me of the Code of Ethics from 1924. A few years after that court decision we just discussed, a realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood a character of property or occupancy, members of any race or nationality, or any individuals whose presence will clearly be detrimental to property values in that neighborhood. Translated to English, don't sell to Black people in white neighborhoods, and maybe others as well. This was in our code of ethics 100 years ago, and it stayed there for decades. Fortunately, NAR is doing a really good job of making amends for past sins, but I didn't feel very good when I found this. As a matter of fact, I felt kind of sick to my stomach. That's me. Your feelings can be different, but here we are. So we have a case we just talked about where the Supreme Court said the government can't put these kinds of restrictive covenants on property. But what about individuals? So in Washington, D.C., a number of folks living on the same block went door to door and said, we don't want those people living here, do we? Now we need to keep our neighborhood really nice. So why don't you sign this petition? Let's sign this agreement that none of us is ever going to sell to them. And so, in fact, the folks on this street signed this agreement, private agreement, no government involved in it. Along came a Black family who bought a house. Now, their private agreement said that no part of these properties should ever be used or occupied by or sold, leased, or given to any person of the Negro race or blood. I don't know the difference between race and blood, but anyway. So it's a private agreement, and the Supreme Court is now looking at not a government action, but private action. And what did they say? They said, well, this is okay. This is fine. This is a private agreement. Deed restrictions aren't 14th Amendment issues. There's no state action. The government's not getting involved. This is a purely personal agreement between a few people. The federal courts have no right to review it. The local courts have no right to review it. And this Black family that had bought the property was kicked out and had to leave. So on the one hand, from 10 years earlier, 9 years earlier, we've got a Supreme Court decision that says you can't do this. And now we have a Supreme Court decision that says, yeah, you can. You just have to do it privately. You can't have the government involved in it. Feeling a little uneasy? Because I am. But watch what happens next. Well, let's take a look first at a couple of restrictive covenants that show up in Pennsylvania. These are deeds and things that have been shared with me over time. So the 24th of November, 1924, same time as NAR passed that interesting language. And here's a property that's being sold by Daniel and Ida Butt, that's really their names, in the city of Erie. And they put into their deed restrictive covenants similar to what we see. Number one, no shop, store, factory, saloon, or business house of any kind. No hospital, asylum, or institution of like or kindred nature. No charitable institution shall be erected or maintained on the premises. No commercial purposes. And in number two, it says, if you're going to build a house on here, you have to spend at least $6,000. I mean, I have a deed restriction on my house that says I can't have an outhouse as much as I wanted one, as I don't like indoor plumbing. And also, I can't serve alcoholic beverages at my property, according to my deed. So this goes on, and it just has normal, ordinary restrictive covenants. And then, and sorry, I know that this is a little hard to read, it's further agreed that the grantees, their heirs or assigns, so this goes on forever, shall not sell, lease, convey the property herein described to any person of Polish, Italian, Austrian, Russian, Hungarian, Slavish, or Negro descent, or to any other person or persons whose reputation is such as it would not be desired in a first-class section. In the event of such a sale, lease, or transfer, the property reverts to the grantor, Daniel E. Butt, his heirs or assigns. This means that even if it's 500 years in the future, if the property falls into the hand of somebody who is Slavish, whatever the heck that means, that the property goes back to Daniel Butt and his heirs. Wow. And what if you didn't know that you have 7% Slavish blood? The property still goes back? I mean, crazy and impossible, but this is from the public record. This is in a deed in Erie, Pennsylvania. This one is from Minneapolis. This is an advertisement from the same 1920s, the Roaring Twenties. Frankson's Como Park Edition. These are new lots and new homes for sale. And I'm going to zoom in on that part that's highlighted here. So it talks about his restrictions, and he says, don't forget my restrictions. Read them again. No gravel will be removed from the lots except as used in the erection, construction, and alteration of the buildings. Okay. No building's going to cost less than $2,500 to $6,000. Super. There won't be any factory or store buildings on the property. And fourth, the grantee can't sell or lease any real estate to a colored person. And then he goes on. What? And then he says, you have my assurance that the above restrictions will be enforced to the fullest extent of the law. You can't have a house for less than $6,000, and you can't let a Black person live in the community. I know that some people who are watching this are not at all surprised, and others are saying this hits a little close to home. And here's one from Westmoreland County. And this is great because you've got your meets and bounds description, right? You've got so many feet this direction, that direction, containing 0.68 acres. And then the next line says, this property shall at no time be sold to foreigners. No definition. I don't know what a foreigner is. Does that mean an illegal immigrant? Does it mean a legal immigrant? Does it mean somebody whose family came over on the Mayflower? Is it anybody but a Native American? I don't think that was the intent, but it's not even defined. And then it goes on being part of the same tract. I mean, it's right smack in the middle of the legal description, the weirdest place I've ever seen one of these, and no foreigners. Now, you have the right with your property to restrict it pretty much any way you want to. If you don't want there to be houses that are less than 3 stories tall and they have to be made out of brick or stone, you can do that. You can file a restrictive covenant on your property today if you want to. But this is a little strange. At least to me, it's a little bit strange. So, 1927. Remember 1926, we got this lovely Supreme Court decision that says that private deed restrictions are perfectly fine. Just can't get the government involved. So guess what happened? Our government got involved. The National Association of Realtors, or NAREB at the time, and the US Department of Commerce put together suggested racial restrictive covenants and sent them throughout the United States. And so they suggested that communities large and small should adopt this. No part of the premises shall in any manner be used or occupied directly or indirectly by any Negro or Negroes, provided that this restriction shall not prevent the occupation during the period of their employment of janitors or chauffeurs' quarters in the basement or barn or garage in the rear, or of servants' quarters by Negro janitors, chauffeurs, or house servants, respectively, actually employed as such for the service in and about the premises. So, no Black people are permitted in the property, but if they work there, and if they live in the back so you can't see them, or you stick them in the garage or the basement or something, or the barn, that's okay. As long as they're occupied there, because once they're no longer occupied, they gotta go. Number 2, no part of the premises shall be sold, given, conveyed, or leased to any Negro or Negroes, and no permission or license to use or occupy any part thereof shall be given to any of these folks except house servants, janitors, or chauffeurs employed in the property. The United States of America government agency, the Department of Commerce, promoted these deed restrictions along with our brethren in the National Association of Realtors. And they were picked up and used throughout the country. They went like wildfire. Now, we had a National Housing Act in 1934. Franklin Roosevelt was president. We were in the middle of a depression, and they were trying to get the government up and running again. So what did they do? For the first time in history, the federal government got involved in some housing issues. They created the FHA. They created mortgage insurance to back the FHA. They revived new home construction. They created 160,000 public housing units, and for some reason really pushed housing into the suburbs. And that was fine. But they also allowed this. So what is this? Somebody please unmute yourself and tell me, what are we looking at? Come on.
A redlining map?
A redlining map. Great. Unfortunately, I can't see you while I'm looking at my screen. So thank you for speaking up. And yes, was that Susan? Yeah. So this is a redline map. This is a map from 1937 created by the Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation. This was an organization that was supposed to help create movement in our economy that was stuck in this horrible depression. And what did they do? They create a map. This is the city of Philadelphia. And you got a color chart. Green is the best locations you could possibly have. So what are the green spots? If you know Philadelphia, you know that that's along the Wissahickon, it's Chestnut Hill, it's parts of Mount Airy, it's a little tiny bit by Montgomery County, but for the most part, the best doesn't apply to most of the city of Philadelphia. This is 90 years ago, folks. The blue parts, Northeast Philly, parts of Mount Airy and Chestnut Hill and Roxborough, those are still desirable. Then you got the gold areas that are definitely declining, and oh my gosh, the biggest section on the map is the pink part, the red part, hazardous. Don't give a loan there. Never see your money again. Bad neighborhood. Now, notice nobody's looking block by block, house by house. Nobody's doing an appraisal. Nobody's looking at the ability of the buyer to pay the mortgage back. They're just saying, don't go to those areas. That does not do very much to help those neighborhoods to pull themselves out, does it? This is the redlining that our first National Housing Act helped to create. I see a couple of things. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to read the items in the chat and do this at the same time. So folks from BCAR, if you see something in the chat that needs to be brought up, please do it and let me know.
Yeah, I'll bring up Sherry Pace commented that she finished a training right before this that showed how redlining, even after it was no longer in use, contributed to racial disparity. Construction only in blue or green, followed by low-cost investment and gentrification in red areas.
Yeah, that's what this led to, but it took a very long time. Okay, moving right along, if I can get there we go. So if you talk to real estate lawyers, they will tell you that illegal racial and religious deed restrictions disappeared in 1948 with the case of Shelley versus Kramer. Shelley versus Kramer was a case involving a 50-year limitation from St. Louis. It was actually companion cases, but it said that for 50 years, the property can't be occupied by anybody who's not Caucasian, specifically to keep out the Negro or Mongolian race. The little research I've done says Mongolian means Asian. I mean, Mongolia is in Asia, but it's certainly not one of the big countries, but this would apply to Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, basically everybody of an Asian descent. The Shelley case was really interesting to me when I took a look at it because, first of all, 3 justices said that we can't hear this case. So 3 of the 9 sat it out. And the reason is all 3 of them had racial restrictions on the properties they lived in. That's how pervasive these things were by the 1940s, that 3 of our 9 Supreme Court justices found racially restrictive covenants against their properties. But anyway, they looked at this St. Louis ordinance, or private deed restriction from St. Louis, and they said, no, the racial deed restriction is still okay because it's private, but you can't use the government to enforce it. So you can't go to court because the courts work for the state. So basically, a neighbor could go next door and drag somebody by their ears and throw them out on the street and say, you can't live here. But if the police get called, or if it lands up in court, or if you try to get the district attorney or something, no, you can't involve the government at all. Most people think of the Shelley case as saying that deed restrictions of a religious and racial nature are illegal. It does not say that. But it does say that no government agency can get involved in it in any way. Moving along. I wish this were a little bit cleaner, but anyway. Lyndon Johnson, who was a very strange, unusual guy, and if you read his biography, not necessarily a likable guy, but he definitely did do good things for fair housing and for human relations. He signed the Federal Housing Act, the Fair Housing Act in 1968. This gives you a list of those who are protected by the act against discrimination in housing, 1968. Has it worked perfectly for us? No, because we still see things happen at times that we are embarrassed by or wish wouldn't. There are exemptions to the Fair Housing Act if it's a small transaction, an owner-occupied building of 4 or fewer units, if it's a single-family house that's sold without the use of a licensed agent, you can discriminate. You're allowed to. And for that matter, housing operated by a religious organization or private club. And if you think about that, that makes sense. Can you imagine a convent that was not restricted to female Catholic nuns? It would be kind of strange if a guy came along and said, I insist on living there. It violates the Fair Housing Act. So religious orders, and if it's a purely private club, you can say only Temple University alumni may come and live in this area. Pennsylvania actually beat the federal government. Our Human Relations Act was 9 years before the Fair Housing Act. And we also have some exceptions to the rule. Personal residence that you rent by owner, you're allowed to choose who's going to live there. If you have just a room in your house and you share a common entranceway, you are allowed to say, I'm a 50-year-old Protestant female non-smoker, non-drinker, and that's the kind of person I would like to have living in the home with me. That's legal. It's okay. You can't list it with a real estate agent. You probably can't advertise it in the newspapers, but the Human Relations Act allows this. And then I did a comparison. What does the federal government protect? What classes of people? And then in Pennsylvania, we go further. But since I want to get to the statute more quickly, we'll race through this, no pun intended. The blue and green states, and now we can add Pennsylvania, are the states that have some kind of law that allow the owner of land that has one of these restrictive covenants on it to do something about it. Doing something about it means different things in different places. For instance, in the state of Maryland, you can go into the public record and obliterate the offending language. That is, you can either take an X-Acto knife and cut away the bad words, or you can take a Sharpie and go into the record and mark out those words. You have to do that after you get the county attorney to approve. I started working on a law for Pennsylvania 3.5 years ago. And one of the things we decided in my committee early on was that's not a good idea. We don't want to cut out or black out the history. We want to leave the history. We just want to take some of the sting of the language away and somehow nullify it and make it not be as prominent for somebody who's looking to buy a home. Because if you're one of these people who's excluded, even though they can't stop selling the house to you, how does it make you feel if there's something in your deed or your title that says you're not wanted here? I think it hurts. At least I know it hurts because I've spoken to people that have had that experience. Now, religious restrictive covenants are different than racial, but we have them. It can just as easily say no Blacks, no Hispanics, as saying no Jews and no Catholics and no Buddhists. But there are hazy areas. There are permitted religious restrictions. And here's one that comes from the Archdiocese of Chicago. And I found it really interesting. So they sold a parking lot next to a church for a high rise. The first level of the high rise was retail, and then above that was residential. And the church said, we want to control the use of this property forever. And so they put a restrictive covenant on it that said, no sale, display, manufacture, or distribution of alcohol, makes sense, tobacco, narcotics, pharmaceuticals, no pornography, no abortions, no in vitro fertilizations, no Satanism. Really? No atheism, no palm reading, and no restaurants that encourages the personnel to be shirtless or to wear provocative clothing. And then they had to define that as hot pants, shorts that don't cover your buttocks, tight fitting or revealing tank tops. And then it goes on to say that any activity that's not listed that might be offensive, you got to go get the permission of the Bishop or Archbishop of Chicago. So let's say I'm the leasing agent for the first floor retail space in this building, very fancy building. And I've got a use like, let's say, a marijuana dispensary. Is that allowed? It's not exactly a pharmaceutical. It's not a narcotic. Anyway, you have to go to the Archbishop and get approval forever. If you're a leasing agent, any one of you out there, can you imagine what's the process for getting the Archdiocese to approve? Anyway, just a little strange aside. So religious restrictions are complicated. You can't say no Catholics may live here, but the Catholic Church can say there are things that are offensive to us as a religion, and we're going to restrict the property against having those uses on land associated with us. State and federal courts have basically stayed away from those kinds of limitations. They allow them, so they're around for a while. Illegal religious covenants are those that try to restrict a religious group or groups from living in the place. So now to the star of the show. I was the chair of the Real Property Probate and Trust Law section of the Pennsylvania Bar until May of 2020, right at the beginning of COVID. And when I stepped down from my chair's position, I started reading about other states that were dealing with these illegal deed restrictions. And I got our section to appoint a subcommittee. They insisted I be the chair, which is a lot of work. Anyway, we put together a proposal for some language for a bill. It goes through a process at the Bar Association that takes probably a year and a half just to get it out there. And Representative Justin Fleming from Dauphin County, that's Harrisburg, became the prime sponsor for this law that I helped to write. It was called House Bill 1289. And what he said, because he's experienced this personally, the shameful legacy of restrictive covenants and practices like redlining have created massive inequality in wealth and homeownership rates among people of different races. This legislation will make it easy and affordable to repudiate discriminatory language from these documents. Not erase them, but say we don't like them. So the law defines an unlawful restrictive covenant basically as anything that discriminates against people who are of a class listed in the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act or the Federal Fair Housing Act, as that law may change over time. So today it's the list that I showed you earlier for both Pennsylvania and federal. Maybe next week, another class of people gets added. I don't know. Gender identity is one of the things people are talking about. If those things get changed in one or both of those laws, then they become protected classes, and then this law applies to them as well. I've never seen a deed covenant against gay or transgendered people, but they may be coming, who knows. So we've defined these unlawful restrictive covenants. As this bill was going through the House in Harrisburg, there were a few people who spoke out against it, and we were worried that it was going to become a political divide. So it turned out that the folks that were against it were concerned that covenants that a religious organization places on the property, like the one I showed you from Chicago, or covenants that create 55 and over age-restricted communities were somehow going to be wiped out by this. That was never the intent. So a little bit of language was added to the bill. It passed the House 200-3 back last June, and it went to the Senate where we thought it was going to die, except that it didn't. So what can you do if you have these sorts of illegal deed covenants in your property? If you're the landowner, or you are on the board of directors of your condominium, cooperative, or homeowners association, you have the right to file a repudiation document with the Recorder of Deeds. What is a repudiation document? We're not exactly sure what it looks like yet, but it's going to be probably 1 or 2 pages that says those restrictive covenants from whenever they were put on the property have no effect from that date forward forever. The law was signed into existence back in the middle of December. The Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development has till March 11th to create this form. And then within 30 days after that, the recorders of deeds are supposed to have them. So starting April 10, for free, no recording charge whatsoever. Unless you record it electronically, then there's like $4.50 for the service that records. But for free, you can record a repudiation document against your property. Wow. So that is our story, ladies and gentlemen. We now have a law in Pennsylvania. We're like the 18th or 19th state in the United States that allows these deed covenants to be looked at, to be thought about, to be handled, to be nullified as best as we can, to take away some of the sting, because even though they're not enforceable by the government, they're still there and they still hurt. And it's not just a black and white issue. You could be Slavish or Hungarian or whatever in that list. And somebody somewhere has written a deed restriction against you. And by the way, depending on where you are in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, depending on where you are in the country, the sorts of people that are being discriminated against tend to differ. So if you look at Washington State, there's a lot of anti-Chinese, anti-Asian. If you go down south, you'll see a lot of anti-Hispanic as well as anti-Black. So it differs. And you saw how in Erie, there was a whole big long list of people we don't want. So hopefully, where I leave you all, and we'll take some questions if you have any, is the Pennsylvania legislature almost unanimously at a time of great divide came together and said, yeah, we understand that these hurt and that our government helped to foster this. And our Association of Realtors helped to foster this too. So now it's time to repair and to fix.
Marshall, thank you so much for, first of all, for presenting today, but also for all of your hard work on this new law that's going to take effect. And we really appreciate it. And I just wanted to tell everybody in the audience that there is a book called The Color of Law. And this book, yeah, we both have it right
Yep.
on our desks here. This copy that I'm holding is the B-car copy that I'm happy to loan out to anyone who's interested in reading it. It really dives into the systemic nature of these types of deed restrictions, et cetera. And it's eye-opening. So if anyone wants to borrow it, just reach out to me, email me, or call me, and I'm happy to loan it to you because it's eye-opening.
There hopefully will be in the next few months a program on PBS called The Shame of Chicago, which is a 5 or 6 part series that a person did out there to look at how segregation took perfectly integrated neighborhoods where people were living together just fine, no problems, and intentionally segregated them with interviews from people who lived in those places and were forced out. It's I've seen a little bit of it, and it's your mouth hangs open. There's no way to understand it.
Exactly.
But anyway, thank you for that. I am going to be with the governor and with Representative Fleming on Monday for an official signing ceremony in Harrisburg. I'm really looking forward to that. It was 3.5 years, but it
Right.
felt worthwhile. Any questions, anybody?
I know for me, myself, it does bring back some memories as we were the first Black family to move into the neighborhood, and didn't realize this until later in adult life. My mom was saying how her and my dad were working on getting the house, but they could not say anything to anyone until everything was final because we were a Black family, which I didn't know growing up. And moving to the neighborhood, I thought, wow, we can't move here because it had white pillars. So I thought it was the White House. That was the only thing I could relate it to. And your point about what is Caucasian was very impactful to me because I lived around a lot of those people, you know, the Polish, the Italians, some Asians later on in life. So it's a very good point. But I did have a question.
Sure.
I'm just wondering if any of the families that created these restrictive covenances have tried to legally obtain that land back.
I certainly don't know. I've never read anything like that, but there are cases where land reverted. I mean, this goes back to the early 1900s, but there was a case in Macon, Georgia, where Senator Bacon from Macon, I swear that's true, took back land that he donated as a public park, or his children did, because it was a park for whites only. And he specifically said in his grant to the city that he loves Black people. They're his greatest friends, but he doesn't think the races should mix. So this park is only for whites. And the problem became that the local schools had integrated their Little League teams. And so there were some Black kids playing ball with white kids. And because of that, the governor, or the former governor, then senator, and his family got the property back. So it does happen occasionally, but I've never seen just one house 40 or 50 years later being taken back. And at this point, you can't do it because no court is going to enforce it, thankfully. Anything else, anybody? Spread the word. If you, when you are selling homes, when you're listing homes, when you see this kind of language in the title search, there will be a form at every county's recorder of deeds where for free, all you have to do is fill it out and say that language, old history, doesn't apply, and help us to start not erasing, but softening the feelings around these hateful words.
Marshall,
Mhm.
Marge Wingate
Go
here.
ahead.
So much of this is a violation of fair housing. How
Yeah.
come the title companies
Yes,
were
sir.
able to continue to convey deed after deed after deed? with
salad?
this?
I love that answer. And by the way, I can give
right.
Act 54. I mean, you can find it online too. So the title companies have an interesting problem. They must give you, if you ask for them anyway, because a lot of them now have hot links in their title searches, they must give you all the information about the title to the property. However, it's also illegal for them to publish this. So they put a disclaimer at the top of Schedule B2 of the title report. Schedule B2 is all these things, you know, you have to get a survey. If you don't, then you can't sue us later. And it lists the easements and the setback lines and the plans and the condo association. But they put at the very top, all the following restrictions are good, but please ignore anything that deals with race, creed, color, religion, national origin, blah, blah. So if you look at a recent title report, but they've been doing this probably 8 or 10 years now, every title company, you will see that language at the very top of Schedule B2. So they're doing what they have to do to give you the full chain of title, but they're also doing what they have to do to say, we are not promoting this. Oh, you have an
Thank
article
you.
coming out, hey?
Well, yeah, you'll be contacted for some quotes for that, and maybe even a picture if you
I'll
get.
give you the picture with the
Make sure you get-
governor, assuming I don't break the camera.
Thumbs up.
But yeah, Act 54, if you just look, if you go into Google and you type Pennsylvania Act 54 of 2023, it'll pop right up. It's short. I actually have it on my screen. So it looks like this. It's called Repudiation of Discriminatory Real Estate Covenants, signed on December 14th. So it's literally 5 weeks. And it's short and sweet and to the point. It says that these unenforceable covenants are null, void, and unenforceable ab initio, which is wonderful Latin. Pam, you know what it means? From the beginning. So anything that ever happened on this property that might involve these illegal covenants, we're going to wipe out. And then the recorder can't have a fee, and the instrument will be construed as if this language never existed. It's really kind of cool and kind of simple. Anybody can read it.
If there's any other questions, just
Yeah.
unmic yourself. We'll do popcorn style if you have any questions.
So Amy Lawrence just came across this at a closing for a listing. The buyer's attorney prepared a document amending the deed to remove the existing language. If you could share that with me, I would absolutely love to have it if you can. But yeah, we all have a job to do, which is keep our eyes open and let people know that this exists. Help to repair some of the damage that our predecessors in this industry did.
Thanks again, Marshall. We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. And I also want to thank our sponsor for sponsoring this.
Absolutely, Court. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And as a reminder, this has been recorded. You will receive a copy of the recording along with Marshall's PowerPoint by tomorrow afternoon. So thank you everyone for attending. And thank you again, Marshall, for all of your hard work. And thank you